Abbas Nazari, welcome to my podcast.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, mate, I first of all, I just wanted to check in and, man, you've been through a lot, and I'm sorry for what you've been through.
Thanks so much, man. Honestly, it's awesome to share my story and to have different listeners every time. I think we're going to cover quite a bit in this chat, and yeah, it'll be a really good conversation.
Yeah. Oh, no, when I said sorry for what you've been through, I wasn't talking about the stuff when you were 7. I mean the Crusaders season, 24.
Oh, that's a really good start. I love that. You know what? Thrown in the deep end. You know what? Here's the thing. Anyone who hates the Crusaders, all right, anyone who hates the Crusaders, just know we can't win every year. It's nice every now and then just to share the title, you know?
Yeah. Sorry, that was a cheap way to start.
You know what? People hate the Crusaders, but you also secretly love them too.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think it was, people got secret joy out of their demise this year after winning 6 years in a row. They're the team that people love to hate, but it's a dynasty. You can't argue with it.
Yeah, 6 in a row.
Speaking of Crusaders, you go way back with Richie Mo'unga. You're like childhood friends. You lived in the same street.
Yeah, that's right. I often joke, kind of half seriously, you know, taught him how to kick, and that's my gift to the country. Nah, just kidding, man. Richie's a really good childhood friend. Grew up on the same street as us, and I think once we get into my story, you'll realize just how awesomely small New Zealand is. Like where I come from, where he comes from, growing up on the same street, and it's a pretty cool story for sure. Yeah,
and you're still friends to this day.
Yeah. So still in touch, and it's awesome to see where his life has ended up as well.
Yeah. He's done very well for himself, as we all know, as you have. You know, you've just flown in from Singapore. Basically come straight from the airport to here. You run a couple of successful businesses in Wellington. You got a best-selling book. You're a smart dude.
Thanks so much, man.
And I think what makes it even more remarkable is like the back foot that you started on.
Yeah. So honestly, one of the awesome things that's come out of writing this book has been the ability to just share my story. I'm on the cover of the book and whatnot, but the number one piece of feedback I always get from people who've read the book or listened to my podcast here is just giving them an insight into what the refugee experience is like what we went through, but also what's it like when you come to a new country like New Zealand, adapting to a new culture, the challenges you face. So when I share my story, you could replace me with someone coming in from elsewhere as well. And it's the same thing, same struggles. You start way back at the end of the pack and you kind of put your head down, get to work. And, I've done pretty well for myself, but it could be me, could be anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, what you've done for yourself and actually all your siblings as well and your parents, it's inspiring. I think probably even more, not to take anything away from you and your siblings, but, your parents, that's a different thing altogether, like arriving in a new country, basically control, alt, delete at the age of 30 or 40, however old your parents were, and starting from scratch. Your dad's got a massive business, 20 staff or something? Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head. When you're a refugee or immigrant, when you come here as a young child, you're able to just kind of soak things up really easily. Your brain, it's like a sponge. It soaks things up. You're able to learn the language, pick up the culture and the customs, make friends at school, enroll yourself in the local footy club, and you're away laughing, right? But when you come here in your late 30s, early 40s, whatever, you're an adult, your brain is already hardwired in, you're kind of set in your ways. And then to pick up a new language and a new culture, and at the same time kind of shed off the cloak of your own identity that you've built up over the previous decades, it's a really hard road, and so adults find that journey way harder. But you're right. I think one of the reasons why our community has done pretty well is that my parents and other family leaders within our community have just kind of put their head down and said, look, let's get some work done. And our family story, the car parts business that I talk about in the book, that's like the Kiwi dream right there, man. That started off in a little shed in Madras Street in Christchurch, and it's grown into this massive car parts import and export business based out of Wellington now. And that's the Kiwi success story. Yeah. Still like literally starting from nothing. Absolutely nothing. The word refugee, and in particular being a refugee, is there a stigma with that? It's not something I've ever really thought about, but is there like some sort of stigma associated with that? Really good question, man. So June the 20th is World Refugee Day, right? And when you think about refugees, oftentimes the thought is usually something negative. Could be that, there's a victimhood mentality there. Could be that, oh, poor these guys. And there is a negative stigma attached generally with refugees, I think. And to be honest, that's how I used to view it. I didn't like the word or the label being placed on me, that Abbas, refugee from Afghanistan, so on. I didn't really associate with it that much. I tried to shed that off. But over time, I've come to see the other side of the coin. Because when you're a refugee, you go through so many struggles that are almost incomprehensible, right, compared to many other people's experiences. So what you see off the back of that, once you go through the struggles of the physical journey to security and safety, then the journey to try and build yourself up again in a new country and so on, that's an incredible feat of strength and endurance right there. And so while there is some sort of victimhood and negative personas attached to it, there's a massive other side to it, and that is one of strength, of perseverance, of commitment. And I think one of the main reasons why I'm so passionate about sharing my story, writing the book and doing these kind of conversations is to help people understand that side too.
Yeah.
That there is positivity, there is strength attached to that word as well.
Respect. Yeah, because it wasn't until prepping for this conversation today that I thought about the word. I've got no preconceived ideas. If anything, I would think refugee is sort of like a victim.
Yeah.
That you found New Zealand or whatever the country they have to go to as a safe place. But I don't know if that was your experience. I think
there's definitely truth to that as well. There is some victimhood, and I don't want to kind of brush that away. A lot of refugees do get victimized, whether it's in their own country, whether it's the actual journey to safety, and then upon arrival elsewhere. And you don't want to hide away from the fact that is some people's experience. But I also want to highlight the fact that there is enormous strength in that as well.
Yeah.
That the ability to, I was a little child when we went on our kind of journey to asylum. But if you imagine, right, listen to this podcast, if you've got kids or whatever, you pack up your entire life and you say, we have to leave, and I don't quite know where the journey's going to take us, but you've got your children in tow, and you're going to take them elsewhere, right? What a journey that you have to take on to freedom, to security, to safety. That takes enormous grit and determination, and that's also part of what being a refugee is like. Yeah,
that journey that you're talking about for you and your experience, that was the best part of a year, and we will get to that because it's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
First of all, like, what are your earliest memories from your first 7 years?
Yeah, when I think back to my childhood in Afghanistan, all I think about is this beautiful valley that we kind of grew up in. So I grew up in this tiny little village, tucked away high up in the kind of mountains or the central plateau of Afghanistan. And I remember my childhood was one of extremes in that it was just incredibly hot, dry summers. I remember us and the local kids would go and swim in this little creek that gave the village its name, Sungjoy, right, which translates to Rocky Creek or Rock Creek. And in the winters, I remember, we'd have a heavy dump of snow. We'd kind of get early morning, get the shovels out and kind of shovel our way out and connect our houses back to the other houses, And it was just an incredible childhood growing up. It was definitely harsh. It was, but it was peaceful. It was very basic in that, everyone took care of one another. Everyone was that kind of subsistence, rural, isolated community. And I don't want to romanticize it, right? We didn't have water, we didn't have running water or electricity to our house or anything like that.
Oh, did you not? Your house looks really nice, though. There's a photo of it in your book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. It looks like it could be in Hawke's Bay or somewhere.
Yeah,
like
classic kind of square mud brick clay house that is very typical of many rural settings in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and fruit trees everywhere.
That's right, and that's the beauty about it, right? So gardening is a central part of Afghan and to a wider extent kind of Persian culture, right? You take great pride in having a nice orchard or garden out front, and that's been part of the Afghan identity for generations. And so, and the beauty, the climate as well. I often talk about to people who can't imagine where I grew up looked like. If you think of Central Otago, it's exactly what it was like. The mountains and the lakes and the rivers, same weather, right? Really hot, dry summers, really cold winters. That's what it was like. And so the climate lends itself to growing, like you said, fruit trees and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful in that way.
So by Afghani standards, were you guys wealthy or sort of middle class or on the poor side, or?
We were definitely, I'd say, on the poor side. So if you're in a village anywhere in rural Afghanistan, right, it is you own a patch of land, hopefully, and you're in the house that you're in, and that's it. You know, if you've got a decent harvest throughout the winter months, that would kind of carry you through for the rest of the year. Any excess might be sold at the local markets, and then the cycle will just continue on, and that's kind of everything that everyone has known for multiple generations. Yeah.
And what did it mean for you? I'm just because I'm trying to think, like when I was your age, like say 0 to 6.
Yeah.
What did it mean for you personally, like when the Taliban took over? Like, how did your life change, or did it change at all? Were you sort of aware of it, or?
Initially, no. Like, one, from a childhood perspective, you're not really aware of your bigger surroundings, what's happening in your country, right?
Yeah.
So when the Taliban took over, they emerged in Afghanistan in the early 90s, and then it was by the mid-90s, 95, 96-ish, when they had pretty much taken full control of the country. I guess because of our sheer isolation where we were, and so far away from the major cities, which was the brunt of where the violence and the fighting was taking place, we were shielded away in the initial years. I mean, we felt it economically, you know, where it was harder, there's less trading happening, it was harder to get access to information, harder to get access to trades and resources and that kind of thing. So that's how we first felt it. But then where it really started to impact us on a daily was starting to hear rumors and stories of what was happening in the cities.
Like what?
And that's a question I often get, like, Abbas, why was it that your family specifically felt in danger or threatened away, right? And what we were hearing, and eventually what we were kind of really seeing, was this kind of complete kind of persecution against certain members of the Afghan community, particularly our community. We call ourselves the Hazara people of Afghanistan. We look a little bit different, right? We have Central Asian genetics, so we look a little bit different. We speak a different language. We worship differently.
You kind of look Samoan.
I get that all the time,
you got
bro.
Sonny Bill Williams energy.
I get that all the time. And so the thing with Afghanistan is, like, it's a beautiful patchwork quilt of multiple different faces and ethnicities and languages and all of that. But sadly, what that has also meant is that if you're in the minority like we were, it often means that you feel the sharp end of the stick the most. And in my book, I highlight all of the horrible things that have happened against the Hazara people of Afghanistan over multiple centuries. And when the Taliban took over, in their quest to, rebuild the country in the way that they wanted to, there was no room for anyone who didn't fit the bill for what they wanted. And so we started to hear rumors and eventual, verified stories of a campaign against the Hazara, whether it was displacement from their lands to actual slaughters that happened in the major cities. And we knew that perhaps at some point they might come in and roll into our village. And so that was the turning point of our lives, this fear that set in. We started to see fewer and fewer kids in school because families kind of packed up and left, and maybe they had left to go internally within the country, or maybe they left externally and left the country if they had the means. There were fewer kids in school, fewer livestock grazing the lands. There was obviously the market activity had completely closed down in all the bazaars, and life really kind of took on a dark turn. And that little image of what I put in the start of what people thought about what my village was like, it just suddenly became a dark, dark place. And so it's only a matter of time before we had to leave as well.
Right, so I'm guessing you know this in retrospect because you've spoken to your dad and some of the other elders about it, and you've researched for your book. But for you at the time, the day-to-day difference was maybe your parents being a bit like triggered or alarmed or worried, and the kids in your school disappearing.
Yeah, that's right. So again,
you were still a happy kid though.
Yeah. I guess I don't want to downplay it, but you're a child.
Right? Yeah, if your parents are doing a good job, then they'll be shielding you from this stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So the day-to-day stuff kind of continued onwards, but it did become apparent that things weren't normal, even to a child's understanding of what normal looked like. And so it wasn't that much of a surprise when Dad said, "Look, we have to leave," and I've hatched a plan, and we're going to leave and head over to get out of the country. Yeah,
which is a terrifying plan. Can you remember that conversation of how your parents sold it to you, or?
I remember distinctly the only part that said that tomorrow is going to be kind of your last day at school. You go say goodbye to your teachers and any of your friends, and by the time you come back, I've got a friend who's going to take us out of here.
And did he say where?
No. And to be honest, I don't think the extent of his plan was all that clear in his mind as well.
Yeah.
But I remember the next day going to school, saying goodbye to our teachers and that. Dad has always been big on education. You know, some other villages that might have left, they probably didn't have, didn't really care about it. But he said, look, go say goodbye to... And we had one teacher, I remember him, I didn't like him all that much either. But say goodbye, shake his hand, and then came back home, and that was it. All of life's belongings were packed into a few duffel bags, and this lorry came by, and we jumped into the back of this lorry, and it kind of took us away from our village and headed on out. And the extent of the plan was eventually to cross the border into neighbouring Pakistan, which was relatively safer. And that was it.
Yeah, so that was the first part of the journey. So you leave Afghanistan, eventually making your way to Indonesia. Long journey, 6 months.
Yeah.
What are your recollections of that?
Without going into too much detail and leaving enough interest for listeners of this podcast to go and buy my book, all right? I love that.
Also, you're here for a limited time only. You've got another appointment, so you need to...
No, really good question. So basically, man, when we left Afghanistan, there was no greater plan. When you're a refugee, all you do is you think of how to put food on your table that day, how to put a roof over your family's head that day, and you can't really think that far ahead. And so we were living in this kind of on the outskirts of a major city in Pakistan, and realized that we can't really go back, can't really go forward when progress our lives here in Pakistan, didn't have any rights or the ability to kind of rebuild our life and whatnot. And when you're a refugee, that's your basic existence. Your ability to impact your life is completely stripped away from you. You're like the way I describe it is you're like a number in a sea of numbers. Who you were back home, your identity, your role in your community, any qualifications, any connections you have, doesn't mean anything. You don't even have a government or an agency that might be able to advocate on your behalf, right? You're this stateless person, and your number one priority is like, especially if you have kids, are they safe? How am I going to feed them today? How far back are they going to fall in their education? What does their future look like? And that's the refugee experience in a nutshell. Can't go back because you don't know when or if it'll be safe again and what's there to go back to. And I want listeners of this podcast to think and apply that same question to what's happening around the world right now. And, you got the Israel-Palestine saga, you've got Russia-Ukraine, right? Think of all those people about what do they do, right? Can't go back, can't go forward, they're kind of stuck. And that was our situation. Yeah,
and so something that I think is sort of, it's way less comparable, but there was a sense during the pandemic, New Zealanders that were locked overseas and they felt like they couldn't even get back to their home country, and just how incensed people were by that. And you and your family, you're stripped from your ego, your identity, and everything. It's like it's an impossible situation for most of us to
100%.
Even fathom.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was in the States when lockdown happened. I was stuck out there trying to get an MIQ spot.
Yeah.
It was impossible, but it did bring exactly that point home that I hope people saw what it's like when you don't have any way forward, when all of the barriers are locked to you. You can't go forward. You can't even go back home. There's no way to kind of move your life forward. That's what it was like. And I'm really glad you brought up that point. And so when you're in that situation, especially if you've got your family in tow, you got to make some harsh decisions. How am I going to move forward? You got to knock down some doors. And that's what, my dad is the head of our family, and other fathers in that decided that we were going to try and seek asylum elsewhere, and we're going to seek asylum in Australia. In Australia it was. When I bring up that point, and I've seen this in comment section, and I see this in feedback and Q&A sections, why Australia, right? Why'd you go from the Middle East all the way to Australia? Was there not somewhere nearby that you could go to? And to be honest, that's a valid point. I remember this guy. I did this event in Melbourne when the book first came out, and this guy got up during the question and answer session, and he goes, "Abbas, great talk, mate, but why'd you guys choose Australia?" Right? And he was very serious about this. He goes, "Was it because we just hosted the Sydney 2000 Olympics, and Australia looked pretty attractive on TV, and you guys wanted to live here?" And I gave him, I didn't know what to make of that question, so I gave him an equally serious answer back. I said, "No, mate, when when we were fleeing for our lives from the Taliban, we didn't quite have time to watch the Sydney 2000 Olympics. But, there was an ad running at the time that asked us, where the bloody hell are ya?
Oh, Lara Bingle. Yeah, with the bikini.
Yeah,
and your dad was like, that's it.
That's where we're going, all right? The ad worked. But I got the gist of what he was asking for, right? Like, why would you pack up your life and go halfway across the world to a place in Australia we've never been to? It's a valid point.
Yeah.
And the best answer I can give for that is this. If you draw a big-ass circle around where we were living at the time, there is no country around us that would be able to give us the opportunity to rebuild a new life. You go to any of the Gulf states, you go into any of the Central Asian countries, you go into as far as Southeast Asia and that. If you arrive on their shores, the very best welcome that you could receive would be a blind eye to your arrival. If that country, be it Iran, be it any of the Gulf states and that, if that country had some sort of semblance of political stability, they just kind of turn a blind eye to your arrival, and maybe they might get some UN refugee agency funds to host you. But no way to rebuild a new life. If they're going through political instability, what they do instead would be that kind of turn the guns around and kind of make an example of you and make you the scapegoat. And every day, sadly, hundreds of Afghans who try to cross the border into neighboring Iran, for example, they get killed, they get shot at, they get drowned at the border. It never makes the news, and that happens on the daily. So why Australia? Well, we'd heard that if you could make your way to Australia, you might be able to seek asylum. And seeking asylum is something that we always have the right to have. If listeners of this podcast don't understand what seeking asylum is, I'll use a rugby analogy before, right? There's a North and South Island civil war, right? And I know the Crusaders are going to win that one. And all the North Islanders, they have
Chiefs.
to...
Chiefs matter.
All the North Islanders, right? They have to cross the border, jump on the yacht, swim across the Tasman Sea to try and get to Australia. Then the Australian government then has a duty to kind of grant asylum. Look at their case, look at their story, listen to their evidence, and if it stacks up, then provide temporary protection for those people.
Yeah.
You and I both have the right to seek asylum. Thankfully, given where we live in Aotearoa, we never have to exercise that right, but some people do.
Yeah.
So we're going to seek asylum in Australia, and that's why we ended up in Indonesia, and from there, jump on a boat to try and get to Australia.
Yeah, so the 6-month journey from Afghanistan to Indonesia, lots of drama. 6 months. It's a crazy amount of time. Yeah. And it was during this time that you turned 7. You had your 7th birthday. And then you see the ocean for the very first time. Yeah, you've never seen the ocean in your life.
Afghanistan's a landlocked country. Not many people know that. Yeah, we're a mountain people, definitely not a seafaring nation.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing you and I have in common. I'm from Palmerston North, which is also
another mountain nation. Yeah.
First time I saw the ocean, it was Himatangi Beach, and it was like the ocean's shit. I want to go back. So you see the ocean for the very first time. It's dark it's the middle of the night, right? When you get to the boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the Palapa?
Yeah. Yeah.
Palapa II.
The Palapa II. That's
Palapa.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. A rickety old fishing boat that was called the Palapa II, which would later find out. And a running joke amongst the community is, what happened to the Palapa I, right? Would hate to know what happened to that.
What did happen to Palapa I?
Palapa I probably is sunk at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, I guess.
Yeah, okay. So you became very intimate with this boat. So it's it's an old decommissioned or whatever. Yeah, modified fishing boat designed for 40
or so, yeah.
40 people. So. And there was how many? Like 400
438. 438 of us, yeah.
So 10 times the capacity. So imagine a studio apartment designed for 2 and having 20 people in there.
That's right.
I suppose it's kind of like that, like 10 times the capacity.
Exactly.
So describe the boat for us. So
it was, so when we boarded, it was middle of the night. Can't really make out much about it. There's a lot of grumblings, and I think to this day, I'm sure there were some people who saw it and said, no way, I'm getting on that, and then turned around. I bet there were, we can't tell, there was that many people, there was that much activity.
Because they've been oversold and underdelivered.
Yeah, exactly. The next day, as we get some semblance of what's happening, we look around, and definitely some sort of modified fishing boat. I think that put in an extra layer for more people to be able to be crammed in. And it was... You're literally packed in like sardines, you're shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee with the person next to you, with luggage and baggage and everything else just kind of strewn in between. Multiple layers, and there's some people on the top, right on the open deck, and there was a couple of layers in the middle, and then there's some people right at the bottom, you know, in the kind of cargo space with the engine and all of that.
So you didn't have a bed or anything like that?
No, of course not.
No.
We were like literally on the wooden decking, like sleeping, sitting down, laying, eating. That was it. Yeah.
And so the men were at the very bottom.
Yeah.
Nearest to the engine and the fumes.
Exactly. The younger, fitter, healthier sort of eldest sons and fathers who had left their families behind. They were in first, and they were right at the bottom with the luggage and the fumes and the engines and all of that. And then kind of the families and those with young kids were kind of a little bit higher up. Yeah.
How much luggage? How much luggage was everyone?
Very little. Very little. Like,
so you had like a backpack with.
That's about it. Literally, like a backpack full of just a few personal belongings, right? Because it's not like you're carrying your life's belongings. It's literally just enough to. Because we were told it was going to be a 2-day journey. Yeah, 2-day journey to try and cross the Indian Ocean and head south to the Australian mainland.
Yeah, so what did you have? The 7-year-old Abbas?
7-year-old Abbas with a backpack. I'm pretty sure I had like 2 T-shirts and a banana and I think a toothbrush and some socks or something.
Very sensible.
Yeah, very sensible. I remember distinctly that I had on a pair of jandals which I lost at some point throughout the voyage. And I remember I missed them so much because, and we'll get to this story, but when we got rescued, the ship that rescued us was this metal giant container ship. So it was with a metal, deck. They would get blazing hot in the Pacific sun, and I got like the bottom of my feet were burnt to a crisp with blisters that thick. It was. I remember missing my jandals very much in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get on this. You must have asked your dad about this. Like, because it looked very unsafe.
Yeah.
So why did your dad go on rather than just like turn around and stay where you were in Indonesia?
I think that's honestly one of the biggest questions, like get on or don't get on, right? It's a massive point of contention, but to answer your question, it's all about desperation, right? Look at where we've come from. We were living in this little old village. Life is good. Like, it's relatively safe. You're in this community. It's all we've known, and that's all we thought our life would be, and that was perfectly fine. But suddenly, through violence and conflict, we pretty much get uprooted out of the country and thrown elsewhere, end up in a refugee camp. We've got no way to go forward or go back or kind of move our life around. And then suddenly we find ourselves on the shores of another foreign country in which your only 2 options are get on board this thing that you hope and pray will survive the journey, and assuming it does, we'll be able to give you a chance at a new life, should you be accepted for asylum, or don't get on board. And what are your options if you don't get on board? You might end up begging or homeless in the streets of Jakarta, right? So to answer your question, it's desperation. It's realizing that you've been dealt a really bad hand and you just have to make do with that. You roll the dice, you pray, and you hope for the best, and that's why. So
you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. And that's, to be honest, man, that's the number one thing I always get from listeners of our conversations and people who've read my book is like, I can't ever imagine doing that. Well, neither did we. It's not like it was planned, but you get put in that situation, you have to do something, right? Go forward, go back, but you can't stay where you are. And to be honest, most of our decisions, I call them decisions, our hand was forced, right? We had to flee our village. We had to leave that refugee camp that we were at in Pakistan, and we couldn't not get on board this thing because what are our options backwards, right? So it's very hard for people to comprehend what we had to go through. Yeah.
And I guess by that point your dad had used all the family's resources available, and it's like, well, fuck, we're in too deep.
Yeah, exactly. So you've made it this far, and the final thing is just this boat ride. So that's right. You've made it this far, right?
So Palapa II takes sail. How's it? Can you remember your first time on water on a boat?
Seasickness. Honestly, bro, that's the number one thing I think about. Like, when I was writing this book, I was trying to imagine. I was trying to bring back all these memories out of the memory bank, and I can smell it so strongly. Absolute seasickness across the entire boat. Like I said, Afghanistan's a landlocked country, right? It's not a seafaring nation. For many, this was many people's first time on the open water, right? Not at the beach, but on the actual open ocean. And we were getting rocked. Like, everyone was seasick. It was disgusting. It was hot. And that's what I remember, just seasick to the day. But to be honest, there was a sense of cautious optimism because people realized this was the final step of the journey. Made it this far. This was it. Just a couple more days and we'll be on, safe, dry land. So there was this optimism that was in the air that didn't last all that long because the engine gave out, right? This thing was already ancient. We were out in the open water. We were being rocked back and forth. And by the end of the first night, this thing starts making funny noises. And by the middle of that night, it's dead completely in the water. And there are a few people, I think, amongst us who used to be like mechanics in that back home who try to give some life and they try to repair this thing. And I think they are initially successful. It goes on for a couple more hours and then it's completely dead and they realize it's beyond repair.
So at that point, you're just like bobbing around in the Indian Ocean.
And this complete panic starts to set in. We're just bobbing around in the open ocean, no real way to go back and forth, no way to go back, no way to kind of call for help or anything like that. And then now we're starting to panic and then we realize our situation there.
And some of the men, I think I read this in your book. They like ripped some of the panels off the boat to try and use them as
desperation, anything you could, like try to get some propulsion going, rip some of the decking off to try and paddle this thing. Obviously, to no avail up against the ocean. And then we start to see what the hell are we going to do. Yeah.
So are your memories of this quite vivid, or is it just from what you've been told?
Out of the entire journey, the memories of being on the boat are the strongest because they're also the most emotionally intense or the most emotionally scarring. Being on the boat in that night of, when we were just kind of bobbing in the ocean, especially when the next day we started to see the clouds darken and then a storm arrived the next day, that's the hardest part about for me to write because it's so vivid. I remember distinctly because of how packed in we were, just like this, shoulder to shoulder. Every time a wave would come, we're all just kind of, all of us be squished to one side and then the boat would kind of balance out and then it'll be pushed onto the other side. And I remember Dad kind of, I think it was a belt or a towel, kind of looped it around one of the rafters and kind of creating a handhold so that he'd hold on to us every time, we'd get pushed this way and that way. And there'd be luggage and people who'd vomited into plastic bags, that's bursting and rolling around with everybody and freezing cold seawater dumping from on top. So I can when I think about it, I can smell the damp wood and I can feel that ocean spray and I can smell the vomit and the human waste that was in the air and all in pitch black darkness too because we're in the middle of the night, right? So that's the most vivid part of my journey that I remember.
Were you fearful or were you just sort of look to your dad for sort of emotional cues?
Both. I think to this day, when I think about it, I don't think there was one moment where I understood the why, the bigger picture, the greater context for why we were on that trip. Like, why did we have to leave our village? I never really understood the gravity of it.
Of course not. Right? You just do what your parents tell you.
Exactly. So, and even to this day, when I try to imagine it, I don't think I'll get a good grasp of it. But in that night, I remember distinctly realizing this is about as serious as it gets because some of the parents were crying. Some of the adults had completely lost it, like in terms of they were in complete distress, realizing that the next wave could be the last, that I've rolled the dice and the children that I brought with me, I'm responsible for their fates. And so that was incredibly hard to write about because I interviewed a few of the Tampa community members and they say, as the head of the household, you want the very best for your children, you want the very best for your family. And for them, the very best for their family was this golden ticket to a new life. But part of redeeming that golden ticket was we had to go through the gauntlet, and the gauntlet was being on this boat, and they realized that they weren't going to make it. And so trying to put that into words for the average reader, and I guess I'm struggling a little bit now, but trying to put it into words now for listeners of my story about how hard it is to take that decision, but more importantly, to then come to grips with the consequences of that decision is incredibly hard. And like I said, I was on there as a little kid. I don't think I fully understood it until that night. Yeah. But I always say, through faith, through prayer, through luck, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, we survived that night and the next day, as the storm kind of rolls away and the clouds open up, trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
So did you manage to get any sleep that night or no?
Of course not.
No.
Like,
did anybody or no?
Nobody.
What was everyone doing? Just
literally hoping for the best. Every time a wave would come, we'd hear the creaking and cracking of the timbers, and we'd be rocked this way, and then we'd be rocked this way and that way and this way and that way endlessly. But the most beautiful thing, and this is a memory that I have so strongly, was at some point throughout the night, I don't know who started it, but there's a famous prayer that is quite common. It's the traveller's prayer, about hoping for safety. Someone started kind of belting that out at the top of their lungs, and everyone else knows it too. And then this cacophony of beautiful hymns just kind of ran through the ship, and it was almost like our way of battling the waves. And it gives me, like it is right now when I think about it, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it, all of us in that boat kind of yelling at the top of our lungs, hoping away the waves that were coming towards us. And like I said, it worked, because we managed to survive that night, and the next day,
How long was the praying for?
The whole night, until literally the whole night, like
until non-stop
until sunrise.
Shit.
Yeah.
Well, it worked, eh?
Yeah, and it worked. Yeah.
Is that Allah? You praise to Allah?
Yep. Pray to God above, and hope for the very best. Yeah.
So when the dawn breaks and the storm's passed, you feel a sense of safety then, or no? You still
not
think...
safety, relief. Yeah. Relief that, okay, I think the worst of it has passed, but immediately followed by, what are we up to now?
I feel like you can make better decisions in daylight, eh?
Yeah,
like
exactly. You can physically see the wreckage that you're in. So the whole thing's still in one piece. There's holes and bits and pieces that are broken here and there. People start patching things up with like tarpaulins to kind of cover up the holes. There's a human chain of buckets to try and, obviously heaps of water inside to try and,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it was literally sinking at that point?
Not sinking, but there was, because of how much water was coming in on top, is all down in the bottom levels. So there was a human chain to try and pump some of this water out. But the biggest question is like knowing that if another one of these storms come by, that we're not going to survive. Not going to survive. And so we start looking out for any kind of help or rescue or anything like that. And sure enough, man, like this small thing pops up in the horizon, and everyone lurches dangerously towards it, trying to figure out what it is, right? It's like, is it a boat? Is it an island? Is it a mirage? What is it? There's a huge commotion, people trying to make of it, and it gets a bit closer and closer, and obvious, okay, it's a boat, and I think it's headed towards us, and then it gets a bit closer, and it's like, okay, it's a massive boat. Find out it's a container ship.
Was it like 250 meters long or something? Like a couple of rugby fields?
250 meter long container ship. And you've seen how big these things are, right? With containers stacked sky high. And it was the Tampa, hence the name of my book, and hence the Tampa affair. And I know there'll be light bulbs going off for listeners of this podcast, because they probably remember the Tampa affair, 2001. The Tampa was a Norwegian flagged cargo ship, and it was heading from Perth in Western Australia up towards Singapore, and it had just come to rescue us. This thing pops up right next to the Palapa and blocks out the entire horizon, right? And there's a famous photo that went and did the rounds, and we get rescued. We get rescued. One of the largest rescues in modern maritime history.
There's so much more to the story, which we won't have time to get into today, but your plane goes past, and you guys use some of the women's scarves and oil to write SOS on the deck. And eventually this ship comes along. So when the ship comes along, is it a sense of relief, like, oh, we're not going to die?
Instantly. Like the moment we are rescued by this, we know that, okay, this thing is unsinkable. We don't quite know where it's going to take us.
There's room for all of us.
There's room for all of us, but we don't quite know where it's headed. But at least physically we are safe, right? That was the immediate feeling. And then so begins this thing, this political event in Australia and New Zealand and international kind of the community knows it as the Tampa affair. So to give people like a 30-second rundown of it, essentially what you've got is this Norwegian flagged cargo ship, right, that is backed by the 100-year-old, very powerful, multi-billion-dollar Wallenius Wilhelmsen shipping line, right? And it has picked up a boatload of mostly Hazara Afghan asylum seekers in the waters between Indonesia and Australia. And we're stateless, essentially. We don't have a country back home. We don't have a government back home that can vouch for us. We can't go back to Indonesia, but we're only a few hours away from Christmas Island, which is an offshore territory of Australia. And Captain Renan makes the decision to drop us off at Christmas Island, which is what is dictated by maritime law.
Yeah.
That if you're a vessel that you've performed a rescue out there in the open ocean, that you go to the nearest port and you drop these people off. Particularly if your vessel, the Tampa, is now unseaworthy. Right, he didn't have 400 life jackets on board. Right, he didn't have the medical clearance or anything like that to take care of us. And the nearest port was Christmas Island. So he heads towards Christmas Island, and this is the late evening, sunset, or in the evening of our rescue. Heads there, and we can make out the island, and there's great excitement. We can make out the island and some of the buildings and lights and that on the island. And then he gets stopped, gets a call from the Australian Coast Guard to turn around, take him elsewhere. Australia is closed. And
so are you... Yeah, what sort of messaging are you guys getting on the Tampa? Are you aware that this is going on, or are you just
very
doing
little?
This up? Yeah.
Very little, because there were very few English speakers amongst us, and so there was, I guess, a delegation, I think, of 4 or 5 people from our side who would go up to the captain's bridge and ask what was going on, and then relay that information down. Not many people really understood what the hell was going on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Most people were actually preoccupied with their own, because a lot of people got injured, they were seasick, they had fainted, they had massive bruises and broken bones and whatnot.
Oh, from the stormy night in the Palapa.
So most people were actually preoccupied with their own physical self at that time, to be worried about, okay, where are we going? Let me just fix up my broken arm first,
Oh, so people had like broken limbs and things.
Yeah. It was and a lot of children and a lot of the people who were probably a bit more vulnerable had succumbed to dehydration and seasickness, and just a lot of people were needing IV drips and that kind of thing. Yeah, it was almost like a big medical scene out there.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit. So the photo of the Palapa next to the Tampa, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's insane. This is going to be a really dumb question, but most of us have never been on a little boat and then gone on to like a big shipping container.
How do you do that?
Yeah, is there like a massive ladder that
I
goes
kid you not, man. The Tampa pulled up right next to us, so if you were on the deck of the Palapa, you reached out, you could almost touch it. Like, it was parked right next to us, and the photo in my book kind of illustrates this really well. And this massive kind of flight of stairs drops down from the Tampa onto the deck of the Palapa, and then the sailors come down, and they kind of do a mini inspection, and then they begin an order. So up you get one by one, literally nothing but the clothes that you're wearing. No bags, no personal belongings.
No jandals.
No jandals, nothing. Whatever you've got, just the clothes you're wearing, obviously go fast as you can. Just like you would if you were doing an airplane rescue, right? You know what they tell you, leave your bags and everything behind, that was it. And one by one we climb up the stairs. Yeah. And that's when we find out, because they write a little number on our wrist to try and keep track of how many people had just been rescued. And that's at the end, they told us 438. I think it was 433, mostly, not all, but mostly Hazara Afghan asylum seekers and some Indonesian crew. Yeah, all up.
And so then once everyone gets off safely, right?
Yeah, everyone gets off safely, and we're on the Tampa, and that's when kind of this whole thing kicks off.
And then what happens to the Palapa? Does it just drift away?
That's the thing. So the Christian Malto, who's the first officer of the Tampa, he does an inspection of the ship, and he thinks, okay, we might be able to tow this thing. But as he's making that kind of assessment, the thing starts taking on water. And so he jumps off, and by the time he's back on the ladder, this thing has started to submerge. And I don't remember this myself, but some people said that when they looked down back at the Palapa, it was starting to submerge and break up, and it's now at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. And all that was left of it was some bits of debris and some wood that was floating, and that was it.
So you guys were arguably like hours away from sinking. It was probably being kept afloat maybe by people scooping water out, potentially.
Yeah. He said at Malto, I didn't get a chance to interview him, but I remember the first officer, he did give an interview saying we tried to maybe potentially tow this thing, but it was definitely not seaworthy, and it wouldn't have survived in the wake of the Tampa if it was being towed.
Yeah, and I guess no one was concerned about their possessions or anything because you got safety in that.
Exactly. So anything that people bought, prized possessions, personal belongings, cash, jewelry, valuables, whatever, that's all gone. Yeah, down in there. Yeah.
And then so they have you like sleeping in shipping containers?
Yeah, that was never the plan. Like I said, the Tampa Captain Renan wanted to drop us off at Christmas Island.
But so just take you straight
just to take there, right? And it was very close. It was only, I think, 2 or 3 hours away. But once he got told that, no, you can't come in, this begins a standoff where he doesn't want to go any further, right, out into the open ocean to go somewhere else. And his shipping line from Norway backed his decision. They said, you're the captain of the ship. We'll back your decision that, okay, whatever you decide, we've got your back. And so this begins a standoff between the Australian Coast Guard and the captain of the Tampa, and by proxy us. And so to make accommodations for that night, Captain Renan and the crew, they open up some of the containers, some of the empty containers that were on board. And he says, look, if you need a place to stay, maybe men and women sleep in separate containers and children in other containers. And we don't really have much toilet facilities for all of you. But I remember them bringing out plastic bags and buckets and putting in a makeshift latrine in this one corner. It was the most disgusting thing, right? Because it's open sewerage just being there. But obviously, to this day, and I make it very clear in the book, we hold nothing against the captain and crew of the Tampa. Like, they did the very best with what they had in all the resources that they had under the circumstances.
Yes, they treated you guys with dignity and
exactly.
Respect. Yeah.
So they did the very best with what they had, and many of the Tampa community members have incredible respect for the crew, and they knew that it was out of their control. Yeah, but so it begins a standoff, man. Like, we end up, instead of being dropped off, it lasts into day 1, into day 2, into day 3, where we were not welcomed, and we weren't getting any information from what was happening back in Australia, because we didn't even know. Obviously, this is pieces that we'd pick up later, but they were in the middle of very, very close election campaign. This is the 2001 Australian general election.
John Howard.
This is the 2001 Australian general election, and Howard was seeking a third term as Prime Minister. We didn't know who he was or what the politics was, or we didn't even know they were having an election, right? But this is all in hindsight. Once we arrived to New Zealand, we figured all of this out, right? That irregular migration, as the media was calling it, it wasn't even a top 5 or top 8 issue or top 10 issue, but Howard was going to capitalize on that. And irregular migration, so he managed to spin it into becoming the biggest kind of vote winner, and he was going to make an example of the Tampa. And so instead of being welcomed on, I think it's on, I can't remember exactly, day 3, day 4, our welcoming party was 48 fully armed SAS troops, Australian SAS, who were obviously on the order of the Commander-in-Chief back in Canberra, were asked to storm the boat, ready for action. Like, these guys were kitted up. It's not like it was in your fatigues. It was in military uniform, right, kitted out in all black.
For you guys?
Fully armed, yeah.
You guys couldn't have been more vulnerable than what you were.
Stormed the boat and surrounded us, and they had essentially commandeered the Tampa. They were now the people in charge. And I looked up the definition of piracy, and it's exactly it. Like, they essentially commandeered the vessel. And so it begins a further standoff, and made for a great media spectacle, and that's when the Tampa started to really make the headlines here in New Zealand as well. And so we were held under the direction of the Australian SAS now, trying to figure out where our fates lie. And all the while we were, like, when I tell the story, it's crazy because many listeners probably remember this ship floating in the Indian Ocean, this red-hulled ship, but we had no contact with the outside world. There was no media, there was no NGO, there was no government, there was no doctors even allowed on board. We were held off, perfectly bubbled away, so that we couldn't share our side of the story, because they wanted to direct the narrative, right? By they, I mean the Australian government at the time wanted to direct the narrative to win the votes. Because if they were to see sites of women and children and families, it didn't go with the narrative that they wanted to portray of national security threat, of aliens, because they didn't want to put a face to the story. They wanted to be seen as this threat that were pushing away and were saving and protecting you guys.
Yeah, because if there's a clip on Nightline or whatever of 7-year-old Abbas with burned feet.
Probably, there might be some voters against that, right?
Yeah, you're so right. When you look back on that now, like as a very successful grown man, like, are you angry? Like, are you hurt? Are you upset?
I think, like I said before, if I had if I'd been a little bit older and I had a better understanding of what we're going through at the time, I definitely would be. And I know there are some people and some members who went through that ordeal and they're incredibly angry, because of how well our lives have turned out in New Zealand, and we get to support the All Blacks.
And the Crusaders, the All Blacks, right? Not the Crusaders. Keep quiet about that.
Yeah, because of how well it's turned out. I don't think there's any anger or animosity.
Yeah.
It's more the best, honestly, it's one of my favorite things. The best way that you can kind of show, I'm going to use the word haters here, is to show your success. We weren't given a chance to rebuild our lives in Australia. Thankfully, New Zealand came to the rescue, right? Someone in Helen Clark's office called up Howard and said, look, we'll take him. Bring him over to New Zealand. And we'll take 150 of them because that's how many spare beds we have here in Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre. And that was a turning point in my life. Yeah. We'll take them. And look how well our lives have turned out. So to answer your question, I don't harbour any resentment or anger at the Australians for voting Howard or the Australian government at the time. I just say, look how well our lives have turned out. Perhaps we would have been given the same treatment in Australia had we arrived. But we don't look back.
Yeah, I feel like you guys, when I say you guys, I mean your family. You've created your own success through hard work. But there's a saying I really like: "Don't get bitter, get better."
Yeah, I love that. Exactly.
You guys have done that. Yeah. So you end up at the detention centre in Mangere, and you have like a 6-week orientation.
Yeah. So
what's that detention centre like? Is it like a jail, or does it feel
So Australia has detention centres. Australia has detention centres on Nauru, on Manus Island, and on Christmas Island, and it's a prison.
Right.
Like, it is not a welcoming place. It is a prison with barbed wire and cells, and they call it an offshore processing centre. New Zealand has what we call a resettlement centre, and it's like a motel. It's beautiful. Like, every refugee who arrives to New Zealand, you go through kind of a 6-week orientation program, which is here in Mangere, right? In South Auckland, and you arrive and you get stamped and tagged, is how I say it. You get stamped and tagged and given all the numbers that you need to survive in New Zealand. Your health checkup, make sure that you're all documented and everything like that. You've got all your social needs covered. You get given an introduction to New Zealand, like this is where you are, literally a map of New Zealand, some of the laws and customs that we have here, and essentially in
like a crash course.
one-on-one.
Yeah.
Aotearoa one-on-one. And then from there, you get resettled throughout the country.
So you guys end up in Christchurch. Do you get a say in where you go? Or
I don't think so. I don't know if there was any conversation. The number one determinant of where you get resettled is the availability of social housing. Right. That's it. So, and given we were a large cohort, and at the time, there was a few social housing available, we were all resettled in Christchurch. And that was it. We finally, after all those months of being on the road and leaving our village, Christchurch was going to be the new home from which for us to rebuild our new lives, and we've never looked back. Yeah,
and you flourished really, really quickly. Like a couple of years after arriving. Bear in mind, you didn't speak any English when you arrived.
No, that's the thing, man. I learned my ABCs at the resettlement centre in Mangere. Like, I remember distinctly all of us kids, because once you're there for 6 weeks, you go through a bit of schooling and that too. I remember learning the ABCs and our numbers. And the first word I remember learning was the abacus, because it was very close to my name, Abbas, all right? And we used an abacus to learn how to write. I don't know if they do that in schools nowadays. I'd probably use a calculator, but I remember using an abacus to learn how to count. Yeah, but resettled in Christchurch, and life for us began properly at the start of 2002.
And I don't know if you're just a naturally intelligent guy or just a hard worker, but you flourished in the school system. Never learned how to spell soliloquy though.
Silhouetted. Silhouetted. Yeah.
No, didn't you crash out of the regionals with soliloquy and then crash out of the nationals?
Yes.
So this is a spelling bee.
Yeah.
So you were how old?
I think I was, what was it, 12? Something like that?
Yeah,
so
so 5 years after arriving with
Yeah.
nothing but the shirt on your back,
Yeah.
you're cleaning up in like a spelling, well, almost cleaning up.
So I kid you not, bro. I'm a big nerd, right? I soaked up everything, like learning the language. My favorite place when I was growing up was the local library. And Richie Mo'unga used to bike past and go to the local rugby park, right? So I can see where he's ended up and why he did that. But no, went to the local library, and honestly, I loved it. Just soaked it all up. We were in ESOL, right? We were in ESOL programs because we didn't know how to speak English. And then after a while, once you kind of get that under your belt, you go into mainstream classes, and then you kind of go from there. But to cap off that story, like I said before, kids just soak it all up. And so we were able to really, our trajectory was like this, like a rocket taking off. Learn the language, pick up the culture, make some friends, get to know the kids down your street, enroll in the local footy club. And slowly but surely you start to ingrain yourself, and it's all smooth sailing from there. Now at this point, I really want to highlight one thing, and it's that oftentimes the refugee stories that you hear are usually negative. Right? Someone who's been bullied at school, someone who's had a negative experience, or maybe the system's failed them in that way and the other. And I don't want to make light of that situation at all, because it is the truth and it does happen for a lot of people. But equally, I also want to highlight the fact that we were also products of the system, and we loved every minute of it. Like, we were never bullied at school, mostly because we grew up in a working class neighborhood in Christchurch. We weren't the only brown kids at school. We were welcomed by our community in Upper Rickety. Like, they knew that, you know, my sister and my mum, they wear a headscarf. They knew we were the new kids. But we just kind of rolled in, and we were welcomed by our school, Rickety Primary School, right? We were enrolled in the Avon United Football Club, which is, you know, no longer now. And the reason I point that out is integration and assimilation is successful when the incoming community, like myself and our community, as well as the host community, they intertwine like this. We were welcomed. There was no prejudice. There was no racism or anything like that. And if there was, we'd gone through so much worse. It probably just rolled off our back. It rolled off our back. Like, we never. I don't want to downplay a lot of people's negative experiences. Yeah. But I'm also like, bro, have a bit of perspective here. So our community came in, our host community welcomed us, and they gave us the platform and the foundation for us to live and build successful lives here in New Zealand. If more of that happens, it's all really good stories. But unfortunately, what I see now is one of two things. Either the new community coming in doesn't want to integrate, so they come in like this, and that doesn't help. Or maybe they want to integrate, but their host community doesn't want them there. And so what you leave is friction. Instead of beautiful assimilation and integration, what you get is friction. And I kid you not, I'm seeing more and more of that. Not here in New Zealand per se, but a lot in Australia, and to a much larger extent across communities in Europe. Yeah. Having travelled there for the last month, I see that.
Yeah. Even with that sort of local community support, I still can't imagine how difficult it was for like your mum and dad, you know?
Incredibly hard. But thankfully, I don't know what the programs are like nowadays, but thankfully back then, you know, there was a lot of government-funded projects for them to go into adult English language classes, to doing employment courses, to getting their driver's licenses and all of that. And hopefully those programs are still there and being funded. And if not, I think they should be, because all of that helps.
You are such a positive guy. You make it sound so simple, but like it really isn't. Like I suppose for you and your siblings, it's like you just had to get to school and take it from there. But for you, like I'm just trying to picture myself in your dad's shoes. Like where do you begin? Suddenly you're in a new country. You're in a state house. You're on welfare. How does he begin? How does he build up his business from there? Where does he begin?
That's the ultimate question right there. And I think there's some parts of it, and allow me to really kind of delve into this a little bit.
Please do.
When I think about my dad, I think of him as a person, entrepreneurial, hardworking, incredibly determined, leader, and overall way more positive, very optimistic in his outlook. So when he arrived here, he realized that he had mountains to climb. Learn the language, learn the culture, get qualified, get out of state housing, build a new life. All of that are mountains that he had to climb and take us with him. But he looked at that as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. And that has then kind of come down to me and my siblings and us as well, that you look at something and either you shy away from it because it's too daunting, it's too hard. And that's him personal, right? You can apply that to 100 different people, you get 100 different results. But because of who he is, that's then translated onto us, and it's made us and my siblings and the Nazari family who we are today. So to answer your question, it was him as a leader and other families and the parents of those families that said, you know what, don't look at this as some insurmountable mountain that we cannot climb, but rather just small steps day by day and we'll get there. There are others who would look at that and think, nah, it's all too bloody hard. It's the obstacles are too hard. I'm weighed down by whatever trauma I've brought with me. I can't learn a language. I'm illiterate in my own language. Whatever other 100 different excuses and reasons you might have. And some people would look at that and think, you know what, you're right, and poor you, and maybe take on that victimhood mentality. But for us, I go the opposite way, because you say, no, that is a lot of work, but look at the opportunity rather than looking at the obstacle. And he did this to further really hammer his point home. He said, would you rather be here in Christchurch with the opportunity to learn a new language and pick yourself up, or would you like to be detained on Nauru where you don't have that opportunity? Because that's what happened to those people who weren't resettled to New Zealand. They were detained and kept in detention in Nauru for like 4 or 5 years before they were able to be resettled in New Zealand. That's
disgraceful.
So that kind of gives you some perspective, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess to listeners of this podcast, you can apply that same mentality. Like ours was obviously being the refugee experience, but you can apply that same mentality to whatever obstacle they're going through, right? Like the opportunity, is this an obstacle or is this an opportunity?
Yeah.
And for me and my dad and my family and most of the members of the Tampa community, of course it was hard, but, you know, it could be so much worse. And that gives you some perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about trauma? Any trauma for you? Or
for me,
nightmares or anything? Or PTSD?
Not for me. I think I was at that perfect age where I remember enough, but I don't remember some of the heavier stuff.
Which is lucky, right?
Yeah, which is
you had older siblings or younger siblings? Older.
Older. I was one of the younger ones.
Yeah,
older. And we often talk about it.
Yeah.
My older siblings definitely remember more, and I had to lean on them a lot for the book. But overall, I think largely positive. That, and there were some, obviously, that did have some trauma that they've learned to unpack over time. But overall, largely positive, yeah.
Yeah, because you're a business owner. You own a couple of BFT gyms.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a heap of shit, though, right? You're a concrete layer for a while. You're an Albright scholar. I'm not smart enough to even know what that means.
No, honestly, man, I've done a lot, and I feel like I've packed a bit in, mostly because I just look at that as just an opportunity. Like, I had the great fortune to go through the New Zealand education system. I worked at the New Zealand Treasury in Wellington for a while. That was eye-opening, just to kind of see how government rolls or doesn't work sometimes. A Fulbright scholarship to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I completed a master's in security studies, so international security, terrorism, that kind of thing. And then I've always wanted to open up my own gym and managed to set that up. So shout outs for the plug, all right? BFT Wellington Central and Wellington East. Shout outs to all my members who might be listening into this podcast. And wrote this book during lockdown 2020. I always joke that a lot of people came out of lockdown and they learned how to like bake bread and learn how to juggle. I wrote a best-selling book, so I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah. The book's
That's a joke, by the way. I hope it comes across. I'm not that cocky.
The book's done very well, and it was released. Book publishers like to put books out for Christmas or for Father's Day or Mother's Day. This was a Father's Day book.
Yeah.
So it was put out at the same time as Sonny Bill's book.
Yeah.
Steve Hansen.
That's right. Simon Bridges.
Yeah. Did you you don't know him, but did you send Sonny Bill a signed copy?
Yeah, man. So mine went to #1, and it took the #1 spot for ages. And I sent his agent, I think, a signed copy of the book, and I said, "Look, you can't win them all, mate." And signed Abbaz Nazari. But I never received the signed copy back, so I don't know what to make of that, but that's all right. But
you do kind of look like Sonny Bill.
No, I kid you not, bro. He was my favourite rugby player growing up, for sure. Yeah, I played centres, so...
I believe you were right too, like Canterbury sort of rep level.
Made a few trials, that's for sure, but definitely not big enough. For Canterbury's tough, man. Like, I got to give credit. Like, the Canterbury rugby system it's just a pipeline that produces talent. And tough academy to be in, but it was good fun.
Yeah. And what about Helen Clark? Have you met her?
Yeah, I met her a couple of times.
Yeah.
She was one of the first to read the book, and I think she's reviewed it. I think there's a quote from her on the front. So she was the Prime Minister at the time, and she's given multiple interviews about the Tampa saga and how it impacted her. And the beauty about it is that once she left office and she went and did, all sorts of things at the UN and whatnot, she's still in touch with a lot of the Tampa communities. Because a few of them were resettled in Auckland and quite a few of us in Christchurch. And she's made an effort to catch up and keep those continuations, keep those contacts alive. I remember specifically in 21, when the Taliban retook Afghanistan, she was on the forefront of advocacy, doing a bit of fundraising and doing just kind of raising awareness about what was happening there. We were on a few panels together online at the time, and just, immensely proud of her decision making throughout that time. But also, I think she's very proud of us and our community and how we flourished in New Zealand.
You guys have really sort of repaid her for her decision.
Yeah, 100%.
Which was maybe a tough decision at the time. I don't know.
I can't remember what the politics of it at the time or how we were received. But thanks for bringing that up, man. Like, I often get put as the face of refugee success just because of the book and a few other things. But I always try and give it back and say, you've made it. If you arrived here in New Zealand as a refugee, and just look at the Tampa community, most of them in Christchurch, they are business owners and they are builders. A lot of them are in the trades, tiling and painting and plumbing and that kind of thing. They have mortgages, they have kids in school. A few of the girls especially have gone into nursing. A few of them have gone into policing and real estate. And they are part and parcel of good old middle class New Zealand, right? They have kids that are born here that hardly speak their own mother tongue. They can't speak Farsi because their lives are in New Zealand. They have properties or they rent. Some of them have gone down the mental health system. Some of them have gone down the justice system. Some of them are either multimillionaires and others are still on social welfare. And the reason I highlight that is that they are part and parcel of middle class New Zealand. So you arrive here, you put your head down, you get to work, and you become part of the cloak of society. Not all of it will be a massive success story, but you don't want to just focus on the pointy end, right? You want to focus on what's in the middle. And by and large, the middle is just good old Kiwis.
Yeah, well, you and your family, it's just bloody hard work, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard work. There's
friggin' hard. Running a business in New Zealand is friggin' hard, but eternally grateful.
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing that listeners of this podcast or readers of my book can get is just, there is immense gratitude. And there should be, enormously grateful for the opportunity to rebuild a new life here. But it's also given us perspective that how lucky are we to call New Zealand home? Honestly, having gone through what we went through, having been given the perspective of life in Afghanistan and what our trajectory could have been versus what we have now, man, you can't be filled with nothing but gratitude, of how lucky we are. And it's sometimes it's really good to remind ourselves as Kiwis that, yeah, of course, this country does have its problems, but it's also nice to just kind of step back and say, you know what, despite that, she's pretty good. She's all right. Do
you think some of us in New Zealand are a little bit ungrateful, for being born into privilege and not being aware of how good we've got it?
I think so. I think it's always nice to take a step back and say, despite the troubles that I'm in, just really big picture, it's not all that bad. And you don't want to make light of people's issues, but they do need a bit of a slap in the face to say, "Come on, bro, it's not that bad," Yeah.
That's the BFT instructor coming out and you just give them a whack.
Yeah.
How were the earthquakes for you?
Yeah, man. 2010, 2011. I was in school.
So you're 16, 17 at the time?
Yeah, I was Burnside High School. Our school ended up being used as one of those kind of recovery centres, so one of the civil defence centres.
You must be not again.
Yeah. So, no, they were, I guess, traumatising for every Cantabrian. But even though I'm based in Wellington now, I love going back down. I try to go back down at least once a month or so. And I love what the city has become.
Yep.
It's still going through that transformation phase, but for anyone who's gone down to Christchurch recently, it's a beautiful city. And I think long term, I reckon we'll end up basing ourselves back there. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And you're married and you've got a baby on the way.
Yeah. So Jen and I got married last year, and now expecting a baby in a few months. So that's going to be the next chapter of life, man.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
That's going to be really interesting. I was thinking about that earlier. Because I suppose there'll be milestones a lot. Do you know if it's a son or a daughter? You have
Girl.
Yeah. There'll be milestones along her life. Like when she's 7, you'll be like, "Fuck, that's the age I was when."
Hopefully, they'll give me some perspective of what my parents went through, and they kind of went on our journey to bring us here for sure. But,
how did you meet Jen?
University of Canterbury. Yeah, we were both at uni together, and classic met. And
did you tell her a lot of stuff? Or did she end up reading it in the book, or
she did a quick Google, I think. No, I remember. Here's the thing. I'm pretty sure we were in a lecture once on migration, and the lecturer put up a photo of the Tampa, and I was sitting next to her. And I think I mentioned, or maybe I put my hand up or said something like, "Hey, I'm on that boat," and everyone cracked up because they thought I was joking. And then I was like, "No, I'm serious, guys. I was on that boat." And they were like, "No, you weren't." And then I told the full story, and they were like, "What the actual fuck?" But no, that's how we met, and we've been together, 7-8 years now. Yeah, it's gone by.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Geez, you're so you've got so much gratitude, eh?
Yeah. I think
such a positive dude.
Yeah, like I don't want to, make light of people's problems and that, but I think one of the best things that come out of the whole journey that we were on was that it gave us a sense of perspective that things can be so much worse. That had we stayed in Afghanistan, I don't know if I'd be alive right now. I don't know if I would have all of my limbs. I could have stepped on a roadside bomb, right? I don't know if I'd be like the prospects for a young Afghan male is terrible. They fall into drug addiction. They might go down, national security route, join the military, assuming they survive. I don't know. Like it is dismal at best. So I look at where I am right now and the opportunities we've been given. I think how different my life could have been. And so once you kind of take full stock of all of that, then there's no chance but to be a bit more optimistic and a bit more positive. And I think if we all kind of maybe put on that perspective and put on that kind of filter, it definitely goes a long way. I think also equally, there are a lot of people who love to highlight a negative story, that it's all about racism this and victimhood that and all of this. And like I say, you don't want to downplay that aspect because it is the truth for some people, but it's not the truth for everyone. Like I think of our growing up in Christchurch, and Christchurch gets a bad rap for being a white city. It's a racist this and all of that, but I'm the proudest Cantabrian there was, because I love that city. It's made me who I am today. The community that embraced us, I'm still friends with my childhood friends that went to Rickety Primary School. Overall, just like an incredibly, incredibly beautiful place to grow up and have the privilege of growing up there. And having now traveled the world a little bit and lived in different cities, you kind of realize that New Zealand is pretty special. Like, we always kind of put down ourselves that all the Kiwis are moving to Aussie, this and that, but I reckon this is the place to be. Once you live and work overseas for a while, you realize that we have it pretty good here. Yeah, so there's no doubt but to be positive. I guess, I don't know, final words. If there's one thing I want listeners of this podcast to get, it's that, one, refugees, think of course, I don't want you to forget that it is an incredibly traumatizing and victimizing experience, but in equal measure, there is an element of strength there as well, especially given, this June 20th, World Refugee Day. Two, that overall, there is an immense sense of gratitude from the refugee community. It's been particularly the Tampa community that were resettled, that the ability to be given a chance to resettle in New Zealand. We've made the most of it, and we've grasped it with both hands, and most importantly, we've repaid our obligation back. And three, to go buy my book. See, that's the most profound one, right?
I was like, these are getting better and better. What's number 3 going to be? You're a bloody salesman.
Doing my best. No.
Oh, I think that is a wonderful place to end it. This has been inspiring, man.
No.
Like, how can you hear this story and not be pumped up and want to get more out of your own life? Seriously.
No, thanks so much. And your final word, I swear there's no more after this. When I got given the chance to write my story, I actually said no. Like, I turned it down solely because I didn't know if there would be interest. I didn't know if I wanted to share my story out like that or if it would be received very well. But now I get given the opportunity, given the platform like this to share my story, and I love it. Mostly because there'll be thousands of listeners of this podcast who will walk away and think, holy crap, I've learned so much about Afghanistan. I've learned so much about refugees. I didn't know what they go through. What do they feel like about New Zealand? Do they love the place? Do they hate the place? You know? And so listeners of this are now all educated about, you know, maybe one person's perspective on it. And that's a privilege. So thanks so much for giving me the platform, and thanks so much for listening.
Abbas Nazari, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Last thing, just want to spell that word that fucked you up in the spelling bee?
Silhouetted. I'm about to mess it up now.
How do you what is it?
Silhouette. No, let's go. Silhouetted. Let's go, baby.
I feel like you're more traumatized by that than most of the other stuff.
I had to prove it to myself that I still got it. Thanks so much, team.